But here we go. So this is a recap of the parashah for last week. So I'm going to begin with a quote. This is a quote from one of the Talmuds, from Simon or Shimon the Righteous. He was a figure who lived in the 2nd or 3rd century BCE. He was the high priest. And this quote is designed to demonstrate to you how temple service is associated with the stability of the universe. So it says this: Shimon the Righteous was one of the last men of the Great Assembly. He used to say, the world stands upon 3 things: the Torah, the temple service, and the practice of acts of piety. The saying attests to an ancient understanding that the temple service was designed to complete and maintain the stability of all creation. The temple was a microcosm of all creation, that is, a small working scale of all creation. Different parts of the temple represented different parts of creation. As an example, Josephus, writing in the 1st century, says this: For if anyone do but consider the fabric of the tabernacle, and take a view of the garments of the high priest, and of those vessels which we make use of in our sacred ministrations, he will find that our legislator was a divine man, and we are unjustly reproached by others. For if anyone without due prejudice and with judgment look upon these things, he will find they were everyone made in every way of imitation and representation of the universe. Similarly, Philo, who's also a 1st century writer, attests to the importance of the clothing of the high priest. He says this: But the high priest is commanded to wear a similar dress when he goes into the Holy of Holies to offer incense, because linen is not made of any animal that dies, as woolen garments are. He is also commanded to wear another robe also, having very beautiful embroidery and ornament upon it, so that it may seem to be a copy and representation of the world, and the description of the ornament is a clear proof of this. So these citations attest to the common understanding that the temple, tabernacle, and the high priestly garments acted as a microcosm of the universe, a small working scale of all of creation. In Proverbs, in the book of Proverbs, when wisdom builds a house, it's associated with the number 7. Proverbs 9:1. Wisdom has built her house; she has carved out her 7 pillars. 7 and building a temple go hand in hand. When King Solomon built his temple, it took 7 years to complete. 1 Kings 6:38. Likewise, 7 is associated with the tabernacle in Exodus, as the instructions to build it are in 7 sections. This ultimately tracks back to Genesis 1 and 2, where creation is made in 7 days. Through constructing creation in 7 days, it would indicate to the audience that the Most High is building his temple, that being all creation itself. But sin quickly enters into the picture through the fall of Adam, and the cherubim are placed at the entrance of the garden in Eden. This cherubim imagery is important, as we meet the cherubim again in the imagery of the tabernacle and later temple. The implication being that the tabernacle / temple is being associated with the garden in Eden. Thus, through the creation of the tabernacle, a restored, renewed Eden-like creation is being indicated. Adam, when he fell, not just affected all mankind, but all creation. In Romans 8, creation is said to groan and travail in the bondage of decay until the revealing of the promised sons. This association between Adam and creation is a crucial element for our understanding of the high priest. As the high priest's clothing represents all creation, he can now act as a representative of all creation and affect all creation, just like how Adam affected all creation with his actions. Philo explains to us how the high priest was viewed in the 1st century. He says this: For the priests of other deities are accustomed to offer up prayers and sacrifices solely for their own relations and friends and fellow citizens. But the high priest of the Jews offers them up not only on behalf of the whole race of mankind, but also on behalf of the different parts of nature, of the earth, of water, of air, and of fire, and pours forth his prayers and thanksgivings for them all, looking upon the world, as indeed it really is, as his country. The 7 creation week days relate to a specific counterpart of the 7 speeches dealing with the instruction to build the tabernacle. As an example, the 7th speech, which deals with the Sabbath, Exodus chapter 31, verses 12 to 18, correlates to the 7th day of the creation week. These associations are important for us to understand, as this understanding is reflected in places like Revelation 1, where the menorah, the candlestick, is associated with the stars. Why would there be a close association between stars and the menorah? This was a common association in the Second Temple period. So I'm going to cite from two places. One is Philo, one is Josephus. So this is Philo, and he's talking about the candlestick or the menorah. The candlestick was placed on the southern side of the tabernacle, since by it the maker intimates in a figurative manner the motion of the stars which give light, for the sun and the moon and the rest of the stars, being at all a great distance from the northern parts of the universe, make all their revolutions in the south. So there, Philo's associating the candlestick with the motions of the planets and the stars. Likewise, Josephus says this: now the 7 lamps signified the 7 planets. So again, you've got two different authors looking at the temple furniture, in this case the candlestick, and they're both associating it with the stars. So really, this parashah really continues the theme of building and constructing a universe. And so this is how the Most High is going to put creation right. You look to the tabernacle, you look to the temple, and this is his way of saying there are problems in the world, but this is the way that his plan is going to come to fruition and build and construct a renewed, restored creation. So that really begins the recap, or the ends the recap of last week's parashah, and begins the introduction to this week's parashah. And that's it.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this being our first one, we went over some of these I guess some of the verses in the commentary last night as well, which I'm sure was really, really late your time. But I guess how would you usually go about this one being our first one in Discord?
Sure. So the way that I do it is I read out like a portion. So basically, I begin with one prayer. So someone may want to begin with a prayer, by the way. And then I read a section out, and then I stop, and then we open up for like questions and thoughts and opinions and insults and things like that. So that's the kind of way.
Okay.
And insults.
All right, let me pull up the I guess the passages. I'll read off I guess Exodus 27:20.
Yep. Exodus 27, 20 to 21. So 2 verses it kicks off with.
Okay. The oil for the lamps. And you are to command the Israelites to bring you pure oil of pressed olives for the light, and to keep the lamps burning continually. In the tent of the meeting, outside of the veil, that is in the front of the testimony, Aaron and his sons are to tend the lamps before the Lord from evening until morning. This is to be a permanent statute for the Israelites for the generations to come.
And then we open for comments, suggestions, opinions, or insults. So do you want me to do the... I'll do the commentary bit, and then we'll kind of flow from that.
Sounds good.
So we've seen how the menorah represents the 7 visible stars, pointing back to day 4 of creation, where the stars, the sun, and the moon were created. The association to creation is further strengthened as the phrase evening until morning is employed in verse 21. Again, bringing to mind the evenings and the mornings of the creation week. Aaron and his sons then imitate the Most High at creation through their tending of the menorah at the boundary between night and day. So the basic idea of that is you've got your renewed, restored creation through the building of the tabernacle, and the priesthood now are going to in some ways mimic the Most High at creation. And so their very priestly work now is entwined with the idea of creation being linked together. So I'm going to open things up for comments, suggestions, opinions, or insults.
There's the oil for the lamps, and this is the lamp that burns continually. Is this the eternal flame?
I mean, certainly when Philo's talking about it, he does. His viewpoint is that the flame does kind of represent like eternity, and so when it comes to this, I would say primarily because you're dealing with the menorah, obviously, and and oil that lights it, and so obviously that those flames would point out to the 7 visible stars that they could see, and so you do have like flames with the altar and things like that, and so it would probably point to an aspect of creation. Within the greater narrative of connecting it all to creation, I would say.
Okay, I got a question.
Yeah.
But is this like the same like menorah, the one is it like the reason why we have Hanukkah, where they had like enough for one day but it burned for 8 or whatever?
Yeah, so obviously you got the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and obviously the temple was defiled, and then so you got the rededication of the temple, and in tradition, you've got the tradition where obviously there was running out of oil, and they needed the space to make the oil, and a miracle was given, and the amount of oil that they had lasted the 8 days necessary for them to create the new oil to keep the lamps burning. So you do have that kind of tradition in the background, but the menorah specifically is going to be obviously the part of the temple furniture as you go into the because you've got the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and the outer court, and so it'd be in the holy place, what's known as the holy place, and you've got this kind of imagery in Revelation chapter 1, where the Messiah is presented as high priest in a high priestly imagery, and if you notice, the candlestick or the menorah is associated with the stars. Well, this was a very common association in the Second Temple period because they all knew that to look upon the menorah was a representation of the 7 visible planets or the 7 visible stars that they could see. And so really it's more temple centered in that regard.
And sorry, I keep on having to like do a full mute because I've got kids running around in the back. So I'm trying to keep it as quiet as possible on the line. Let's see here. So just picking apart different parts in here that might also echo things in the New Testament. The veil that is in front of the testimony, testimony being the stone tablets in the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're coming from the 1st century, in the 1st century there were 2 main curtains in the temple. So you got an inner one and an outer one, and the outer curtain, not a lot of people know about, but actually Josephus talks about it. It's about 80 feet high, and it actually had the embroidery of the universe on it. And so if you was there in the 1st century and you saw this big 80-foot curtain on the outer part of the temple, you would see all of creation. you would see the imagery of the universe woven into it. And so there would be a natural association there, right there in the first century, with the temple to the universe. And so obviously we're dealing with the tabernacle, and the tabernacle is constructed a bit differently. And so there'll be this concentration on a different type of veil and curtain than you would do in the temple.
I guess anyone else have any other questions, comments, or want to insult, as Nazarene puts it?
Naz has a pile of smelly socks that he has not washed yet. Isn't that right, Naz?
There we go.
Yeah,
Like we take the insult portion and just turn it personal insults. It's great. Okay, so Exodus 28. I'll just go into that part. The garments for the priests. Next, have your brother Aaron brought to you from among the Israelites, along with his sons Nadab, Abihu, and Eleazar, and Ithamar, to serve me as priests. Make holy garments for your brother Aaron. Give him glory and splendor. You are to instruct all the skilled craftsmen whom I have filled with a spirit of wisdom to make garments for Aaron's consecration, so that he may serve me as a priest. These are the garments that they shall make: a breastpiece, an ephod, a robe, a woven tunic, a turban, and a sash. They are to make these holy garments for your brother Aaron and his sons, so that they may serve me as priests. They shall use gold along with purple, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen.
Okay, so so when it comes to this, we've got this emphasis now on the clothing of the high priest in Exodus chapter 28. So you've got one link, at least one link back to Genesis chapter 3. Just as the Most High clothed Adam and Eve, the priesthood is now clothed with a coat. So in the Hebrew there for coat, it's actually the same word that you see employed in Genesis chapter 3. And this is one reason why when some point to Adam, they say that he's in a priestly context, because, for instance, when he's told to go into the garden and serve in the garden and keep it, these are actually, in the Hebrew, they're actually terms employed for the priesthood later on. And so there's little indications within the text, just in a subplot, that Adam is actually in a high priestly context, or a priestly context at the very least. And so the high priest is clothed with beautiful and glorious garments. And so these types of garments would no doubt bring to mind the glory that Adam had, right? Because if we think about Moses, for instance, when he came before the Most High, his face began to shine. And so there's a little implication there in the Torah. If you get quite close to the Most High, you're likely to shine. And so if we track that reasoning back to Adam, it's very likely that he did actually have the kind of luminous type of appearance. And so anciently there was comparisons between Adam and Moses and things like this. And so there was extended traditions concerning Adam, about how glorious he was and what kind of garments he wore and so forth like this. When the Dead Sea Scrolls, they talk about Adam, they talk about all the glory of Adam that he had. And it was part of the hope of the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls, whoever wrote them, that they would again attain to the glory that Adam had. And so when you've got this kind of glorious garment that the high priest wears, the high priest now would be embodying Adam in the context of a renewed, restored creation. Because if you remember, there's cherubim imagery in the tabernacle, and so you've got your new Eden, you've got your new creation, and now you've got your new Adam in the high priest. And there's a little indication in a document known as Ben Cyrek. So Ben Cyrek was written before the 1st century, and in that particular document, it speaks about the high priest, and it gives some insight into how the high priest was being viewed. And there's a Hebrew version and a Greek version. And in the Hebrew version, it actually aligns the beauty that Adam had to the beauty of the high priest. And so obviously that would invite the audience to make a comparison between Adam and the high priest. And so again, when you're thinking of temple service, it's thoroughly Adamic. It's thoroughly entwined with Eden imagery. The intention is to say Genesis chapter 1 to 2 was the Most High's true intent with mankind. That's what he wanted to begin with. And that hasn't gone away. And this is what he's trying to bring mankind back to. And you'll see this at the very end, for instance, in Revelation in chapter 21, 22, where you'll get these associations with Jerusalem imagery, Eden imagery, because you've got the tree of life within Jerusalem. So it's connecting the two together. And the people have the name of the high priest on their foreheads, which we're going to see in this chapter, that the high priest will bear the name of Yod-Heh-Vav on his forehead. And so again, it's going to combine all of that imagery together and say that this is what the Most High truly intended for mankind. So that's my comments. Any other thoughts, opinions, comments, suggestions, insults?
I think it's interesting that a lot of this stuff, as far as the how the high priest is dressed and all the different pieces of the high priest, seem to allude also to Christians today, being that there's a lot of that same imagery of almost acting as priests, talking about wearing the breastpiece of righteousness, or the breastplate of gentleness and love, talking about the clothing or the fine linens of compassion, kindness, humility, patience. So it's more like almost like a spiritual look when you're talking about believers, and how everyone is to reflect almost the same as the high priest in a way. Talking about wearing like God will be your crown, and going on with similar imagery and different pieces that the high priest would have been wearing, but then relating it more to a personal reflection and an inner being or interchange.
Yeah, I mean, it's this aspect of elevation, isn't it? And so basically, from the get-go, mankind is elevated, right? Adam is elevated. And so that's one of the roles of the Messiah, is to elevate those around him, right? Because within the Messiah, you've got all of these imageries combined. You've got the Adamic imagery combined with high priestly imagery. And so basically, as the Messiah is the high priest, he therefore can elevate all of creation around him. And so we are elevated with him. And so, yeah, when it comes to, righteous acts and things like this all adds back to the stability of the universe, because it's priestly in nature. It's priestly work that you're doing. And so that's really the mechanism by which you're going to understand what the scriptures are saying. It's through the tabernacle, temple, and high priest. And then that's going to encapsulate your life. You're going to participate in that through that type of elevation.
All right, just leave it a moment. Anyone else have any other comments on the clothing or an aspect to the microcosm? All right, we're gonna keep moving on. This is the ephod. They are to make an ephod of finely spun linen, embroidered with gold and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. She'll have 2 shoulder pieces attached at 2 of its corners so that it can be fastened. And the skillfully woven waistband of the ephod must be 1 piece of the same workmanship, with gold, with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and with finely spun linen. Take 2 onyx stones and engrave on them the names of the sons of Israel, 6 of their names on 1 stone, and the remaining 6 on the other, in order of their birth. Engrave the names of the sons of Israel on the 2 stones the way a gem cutter engraves a seal. Then mount the stones in gold filigree settings. Fasten both stones on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as memorial stones for the sons of Israel. Aaron is to bear the names on his 2 shoulders as a memorial before the Lord. Fashion gold filigree settings and 2 chains of pure gold made of braided cordwork, and attach these chains to the settings.
Yeah, so there we've got the description of the ephod, and so it's connected to the idea of the tribes of Israel as well, because when the high priest, he acts as a representative of the nation, so it works 2 ways. So he represents the nation before the Most High, and he represents the Most High before the nation. He's the in-between guy. So in describing the ephod, Josephus informs us of the connections of the universe it represented. So this is from Josephus. Now the vestment of the high priest being made of linen signified the earth, and the blue denoted the sky, being like the lightning in its pomegranates, and in the noise of the bells resembling thunder. And for the ephod, it showed that God made the universe of 4 elements. And for the gold interwoven, I suppose it related to the splendor by which all things are enlightened. The key here, that the garments of the high priest made him a representative of all creation. And Philo really brings this out as well. The high priest then, being equipped in this way, is properly prepared for the performance of all sacred ceremonies, that whenever he enters the temple to offer up the prayers and sacrifices in use among his nation, all the world may likewise enter in with him, by means of the imitations of it which he bears about him, the garment reaching to his feet. So there, it's more than just simply that he's representing one nation. He is representing all of creation. The Messiah in Revelation 1 is dressed in the high priestly garments, as he is seen as being clothed to the feet with a golden girdle or belt. Josephus similarly describes the belt as being interwoven with gold. So this is from Josephus. But that belt that tied the garments to the breast was embroidered with 5 rows of various colors of gold and purple and scarlet, as also of fine linen and blue, with which colors we told you before the veils of the temple were embroidered also. So there it's more of a significance for the entire creation. It's not just simply one man going into a sacred space. It's not just simply representing his own country. He is a representative of the entire world. And so really, fundamentally, when it comes to the understanding of the Messiah, how we can atone for all of creation, it's built upon these high priestly ideas that the high priest is a microcosm of all creation. And therefore, you get your inner logic when it comes to the Torah as to why it's logical in the context of the Torah that one man can atone for all of creation, because he's not only going to atone for sin, he's going to bring the decay, the bondage of decay, to an end. And so he's affecting all of creation, not just simply mankind. But fundamentally, it's right there in the Torah with the high priest to Adam.
So we have the priest, which represents, through the clothing of the priest, represents all of creation. Through the temple, we have, once again, all of creation represented.
Yes.
And then I think this might have gone back into the last week as well, but also all of Earth itself acts as a representation of creation, with like Eden being the temple. So just like a smaller and smaller scale each time.
Yeah, this is the place where the Most High is going to put creation right. This is his standard. This is his true intention with mankind. This is how he's going to restore, renew, and atone for all of creation. And so what we're going to see later on is not only is that the temple stroke tabernacle or the high priest is a microcosm of all universe, but we've got this cosmic geography where the land of Israel is actually understood to be the center of the earth. Not only that, but the temple is going to be on a high mountain, and not just any high mountain, the highest mountain. So it's the highest point, and it's the center of the earth. And so you've got this cosmic significance, and it's all pointing to the temple and the high priest. So everyone's going to be looking at it, and in effect, they're looking at new restored creation. They're looking at Eden, Adam, and so forth. And so basically, this is very theological, but it's entwined with ideas of cosmology, understanding of the universe, and the true original intention that the Most High had at the very, very beginning.
That was my question. You know, if it's the center of the earth, how does that work with it being like a sphere?
Well, you got to understand this really in cosmic geography, because it's trying to make a theological point. The theological point is that this is the center of the universe. Essentially, this is the focal point where all of the nations are going to look to. Because in the prophets, what you see is the nations are going to flow to Jerusalem. They're going to come up to Jerusalem. It's going to be the focal point of the entire earth. And so it places these types of significances to the land of Israel. It's the center of the earth, as Ezekiel says. The temple is going to be on the highest mountain, as Isaiah says, chapter 2. And so these are aspects of cosmic geography. And when you think about Eden, in Ezekiel chapter 28, the Garden of Eden is associated with being a mountain. Okay, so from the very get-go, when you're reading Genesis 1 and 2, you're actually reading about a mountain. And this is really, really significant later on, because we find out that the temple ends up on a mountain. And so again, it's this Eden imagery, it's this Genesis imagery that's at the very, very beginning, and it's unpacked through the prophets, even to the point where when it's talking about exile and about the end of the exile, it couches it in terms of Adam and Eden imagery. So you'll have places like in the prophets, like Isaiah 51 and Ezekiel 36, which talk about how Jerusalem or the land is going to become Eden. And in Ezekiel chapter 36, it even uses the Hebrew word for Adam when it's talking about the flocks of men that he's going to place into his new Eden when he ends the exile. So he's placing his new Adam into his new Eden. And so even notions of the end of the exile are couched in these terms to bring you home to the point that what was in the beginning is the Most High's true intent, and you can declare the end from the beginning, and you begin there in Genesis, and it kind of outworks and outcrops, and you've got your interpretive key for the rest of the Tanakh. What is the purpose of this tabernacle? What is the purpose of this temple? Where it's tracking back to Eden.
You say rather than be more like center in center more like in a space sense, but more centered like center of attention.
So I would say you gotta take the scriptures as for what they're saying in the framework of how they understand things. Okay, so when it comes to the kind of geography and cosmology, I think that they would have really believed that Israel is the center of the earth, right? But I think that there's a greater theological point there that it's trying to make. Everyone's going to be flowing to it. Everyone's going to be looking to it. This is the center of the universe. Look that way. This is what the Most High wants. And so this is why you get this center of the earth language in Ezekiel. It has that. Some would translate it the navel of the earth. And so it's pointing to this greater idea that just as the temple is a microcosm of all creation, and also the temple is going to be on the highest mountain, because in the ancient Near East, that's where you meet the divine. It's on the mountains, and so by making it the highest mountain, you're saying that this trumps everything else. This is the place where you meet the divine. This is the place where you meet restoration. This is the place where everything's going to be restored, renewed, and so forth like that. So it's making a greater theological point that this is going to be the focal point of all the earth.
Yep. Dean, I'm calling you out because you usually are super into this stuff. Dean
Maybe
is
he's
not
taking
here.
notes.
All right.
I am
Maybe it's-
here.
Oh,
I am
okay.
here. My mic was muted.
Yeah, I'd be interested possibly looking in a like even in a Pangea sense, seeing if it would be an actual like physical center point of Earth, or of all the land, looking at it from a true scale thing. Just not so much that it would affect any theology or anything, but just to see how it would look with in a Pangea type setting.
Yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't have any problem with that. I mean, geography changes and things like this, so
Yeah,
it could be the real center of the earth in a very real sense.
right. Yeah, I think it would just be interesting to look at. And I know there's like 500 different Pangea models, so where they're all, you have it where it's like looks more like a horseshoe, or more just like a straight line, and there's a bunch of different ways that it could ultimately look. But yeah, I think that'd be kind of an interesting thing to look into. I might do that after this. Okay, next section. And I need to stop opening so many tabs when we're talking so I can find things faster.
That's impossible.
I know. Okay, so we're on the breast piece. Oh, this is in the Parshatach, ancient Hebrew conception of the universe. Yeah, I don't know if you guys see that image there. Okay, so the breast piece. You are also to make a breast piece of judgment with the same workmanship as the ephod. Construct it with gold, with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and with finely spun linen. It must be square and then folded over double, a span long and a span wide. Mounted on a setting of gemstones, 4 rows of 4 stones. In the first row, there should be a ruby, a topaz, and emerald. In the second row, a turquoise, sapphire, and diamond. In the third row, a jacinth, an agate, and amethyst. And in the fourth row, a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. Mount these stones in gold filigree settings. The 12 stones are to correspond with the names of the sons of Israel, each engraved like a seal with the name of one of the 12 tribes. For the breast piece, make braided chains like cords of pure gold. You are also to make 2 gold rings and fasten them to the 2 corners of the breast piece. Then fasten the 2 gold chains to the 2 gold rings at the corners of the breast piece. And then fasten the other 2 ends of the 2 chains to the 2 filigree settings, attaching them to the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. Make 2 more gold rings and attach them to the other 2 corners of the breast piece on the inside edge next to the ephod. Make 2 additional gold rings and attach them to the bottom of the shoulder pieces of the ephod on its front near its seam, just above its woven waistband. The rings of the breast piece shall be tied to the rings of the ephod with the cord of blue yarn, so that the breast piece is above the waistband of the ephod and does not swing out from under the ephod. When Aaron enters the holy place, he shall bear the names of the sons of Israel over his heart on the breastpiece of judgment as a continual reminder before the Lord. And place the Urim and Thummim in the breastpiece of judgment, so that they will also be over Aaron's heart whenever he comes before the Lord. Aaron will continually carry the judgment of the sons of Israel over his heart before the Lord. And that is the end of that section.
Okay, so the breastplate had 12 stones that were associated with the 12 tribes of Israel. However, if you remember in Genesis, the fathers of the tribes are associated with the stars. So Genesis like 37:9, for instance, where Joseph has his dream and his brothers are looked upon as stars. And so you've got this star imagery that's associated with the tribal fathers. And when talking about the relationship of the stones to the universe, Philo and Josephus associate the stones with the zodiac. So this is Josephus, and he says, and for the 12 stones, whether we understand them by the months, or whether we understand the like number of the signs of that circle, which the Greeks call the zodiac, we will not be mistaken in their meaning. And Philo says this, then on this chest there were 12 precious stones of different colors, arranged in 4 rows of 3 stones in each row, being fashioned so as an emblem of the zodiac. So both writers there are again conceptualizing the high priest, the imagery, and associating the stones there with the zodiac. And so again, it's you're not just simply bearing the names of Israel before the Most High when you come into the holy place. It's a pointer to all of creation and time itself as well, because you've got the idea of seasons with the zodiac as well. So in Revelation, the Messiah associates himself with the morning star, and you can see this in Revelation 22. And similarly in Ben Cyrek, again pre-1st century, the high priest is associated with morning star imagery, and we can see this in Cyrek chapter 50 verse 6. He says this concerning the high priest: he was as the morning star in the midst of a cloud, and as the moon at the full. So here you got the high priest, but he's being associated with morning star imagery, just like how in Revelation the Messiah is being associated with morning star imagery. Also, the high priest movements were understood to correspond to the rising of the sun through the firmament. So in the Greek of Ben Cyrek, they were very aware of this type of symbolism. So when they're describing the motions of the high priest, it says this, with the words of how glorified, how Simon in the procession of the sanctuary, where they then link Simon the high priest to sun imagery, verse 7. By the 2nd century BCE, the Greek word for procession was primarily used to refer to the procession of the heavenly bodies, the stars, the sun, as depicted in Psalms 19:4-6 of the cosmos itself. So sun imagery is also applied to the Messiah in chapter 1, where his face shines like the sun. Again, linking the Messiah to high priestly imagery. So you've got this imagery of morning star in Revelation 22, and you've got this imagery of the face shining like the sun in Revelation chapter 1. And because we know how the high priest was being viewed in the Second Temple period, we can see the parallels with the high priestly imagery. The stones on the shoulders of the breastplate were also representative of the sun and the moon. Both Philo and Josephus tell us about these associations. So this is Josephus. He says, each of the sardonyxes declared to us the sun and the moon. Those I mean that were in the nature of the buttons on the high priest's shoulders. And Philo says this, for in the first place, the 2 emeralds on the shoulder blades, which are 2 round stones, are, in the opinion of some persons who have studied the subject, emblems of those stars which are the rulers of night and day, namely the sun and moon. These stones were used to make decisions and stopped shining, according to Josephus, a couple hundred years before he wrote his own work. So this is Josephus talking about the stopping of the shining of these stones. Now this breastplate and this sardonyx stopped shining 200 years before I composed this book, God having been displeased at the transgression of his laws. So up until like a couple of 100 years, there was still a belief that this actual garment could actually shine at decisions. So there's a history there of functionality when it comes to the garments of the high priest. Comments, suggestions, opinions, or insults?
I think we touched on this one a little while back, but in Revelation, where it's talking about like the sun will lose its shine or its brightness, and how these like the stones that would shine, I think they lost their ability to shine or something, or at least Talmudic tradition. It says that they like stopped shining, and that was a sign that God was upset over the sin of the people or something. I have to look into the exact specifications there, but do you think the two there are related in any sense?
I mean, there might be. When it comes to Revelation and the kind of imagery that you're seeing, that I would say probably what underpins it is kind of high priestly temple imagery, and so these types of associations with the sun and the moon, I think is kind of in the right direction. I think that what's happening in Revelation, that seems to be some kind of high priestly or temple imagery that's just below the surface that needs to be unlocked, and then that kind of unravel things. But I don't have a lot more comments on that specifically.
Gotcha.
May I? Oh,
continue. Go.
may I be permitted to ask a somewhat side question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
With it being Purim and having just read the book of Esther this morning, as you were describing the priestly garments, I don't know if you're familiar with what's written in chapter 8 about what Mordecai was wearing when he went out from the king.
Remind me.
Okay, so I was just wondering if this was somewhat priestly imagery. It says, "Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple." It might be a really stupid question. I do apologize.
I mean, there might be I guess there might be high priestly imagery behind it. I would have to think about it a bit more.
It was just a side thought. I apologize.
No, I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I know there's no stones there, but you've got the colors, the linen and the purple and the gold.
That's what we've got to look out for. We've got to look out for these allusions, right, in the text, because they could be hinting towards a greater context. And I think that asking those types of questions is awesome. And I think that's the types of questions that we should ask, right? We shouldn't just read these as dry narratives and incidental details that they're telling us. I think that these details are intentional. And so when you're identifying stuff like that, I think I would have to kind of stop and scratch my head and go, okay, what's happening here? So I think that you're going on the right direction.
Cool, thank you.
Any other comments, suggestions, opinions?
Yeah, on I guess just looking at other imagery and things, talking about the morning stars and relating to priests, which also recalls more of that Isaiah 14, how you fallen, morning star, son of the dawn. It's just similar imagery, being making yourself like the most high, but this is in the context of someone who has been more in a higher position and then has fallen away from that. So almost like a negative priest in a way.
It could very well be. I mean, here's the problem with Isaiah 14. We don't really have another. Well, we do actually. We do and we don't. We have an allusion to Isaiah 14 in the Gospels, and so the Messiah seems to employ it in a very unique way that is really underappreciated. Let me try and off the top of it, I can't remember where. It's in the Gospel of Matthew. Hang on, wait to you. Is it Matthew 11, 12? So let me. Here we go. So this is the only known allusion I have to Isaiah 14. And it says this: "And you, Capernaum, who have been exalted to the heaven, you will be thrown down to Hades. For if the powerful acts happening in you had taken place in Sodom, it would remain until today." So this language of have been exalted to the heaven, you will be thrown down to the Hades. There seems to be an allusion to Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 15 there. And so he's applying it to Capernaum. And so he's applying this to an actual location, which is it's an interesting thing to do. But I personally don't know what's actually happening there. I haven't investigated enough to really say. But I would say that verse there, Matthew 11:23, is the only example that we have of Isaiah 14 being cited and given some form of interpretation. So I think it would need more study, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And just like, I guess going through the reading and looking at it, it kind of just realized I had my thing muted. But going through it and it just from the initial reaction of like the Morning Star and talking about, being a representation of the Most High, or trying to be like basically elevating on that kind of a level in a microcosm sense. And so the Isaiah 14 just came to mind. So yeah, I'm probably gonna look into that, and I'll post some stuff if I find anything in the chat later this week. But yeah, I don't know. I'm seeing a sense of anti-priest in a way, or a someone trying to create a false microcosm or a failed microcosm.
This is good because that type of thinking is really needed, because we should be thinking about these texts in this way, because one thing that scholarship is beginning to realize more and more now is that the centrality of the temple and the high priest within the Second Temple period material, they're beginning to really realize how important understanding the temple is, and understanding the tabernacle, and how temple focused the scriptures really are. And so obviously I haven't studied every verse in light of this, and there's myriads of different verses that you can go to, but I think that is on the right track, and we should be asking these questions. So these, this is why we have this study, right? It's to bring up questions and say, okay, well, how about this verse? How do we understand this verse in light of X, Y, and Z? So I think that we're going in the right direction.
All right, I'm just writing this down just so I remember to actually look it up and do it. Okay, yeah, hopefully I'll have something. I'll scan all of the books and see what I can find. Okay, moving on. That was just the breast piece, right?
Yep, we're in Exodus 28:31 to 43 now.
Okay, cool. The additional priestly garments. You are to make the robe of ephod entirely of blue cloth with an opening at its top in the center. Around the opening shall be woven collar with an opening like that of the garment, so it will not tear. Make pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn all around the lower hem with gold bells between them, alternating so that the gold bells and the pomegranates around the lower hem of the robe. Aaron must wear the robe whenever he ministers, and its sound will be heard when he enters or exits the sanctuary before the Lord, so that he will not die. You are to make a plate of pure gold and engrave it as on a seal, holy to the Lord. And that's the engravement that's supposed to be on there. Fasten it to a blue cord to mount it on the turban. It shall be on the front of the turban, and it will be worn of Aaron's forehead, so that he may bear the iniquities of the holy things that the sons of Israel consecrate with regard to all of their holy gifts. It shall always be on his forehead, so that they may be acceptable before the Lord. You are to weave the tunic with fine linen, make the turban of fine linen, and fashion an embroidered sash. Make tunics, sashes, and headbands for Aaron's sons, to give them glory and splendor. If you put these garments on your brother Aaron and his sons, anoint them and ordain them and consecrate them, so that they may serve me as priests. Make linen garments to cover their bare flesh, extending from waist to thigh. Aaron and his sons must wear them whenever they enter the tent of meeting or approach the altar to minister in the holy place, so that they will not incur guilt and die. This is to be a permanent statute for Aaron and his descendants.
Yeah, so again, yeah. So you got this kind of, this is where the heavens and the earth mesh together. This is where things interlock. And when you walk into that place where things interlock, it can be a very dangerous place. And this is why you've got the instruction about the priesthood keeping the sanctity of the holy place. If you walk in there and you're not meant to be there, or you defile it, it can end very badly with you, right? It can be a very dangerous place. It's because the Most High is very serious about this sacred space, and he's very serious in demonstrating that this is the place where you get redemption. This is the place of his new Eden, and sin is going to be dealt with. And so you can't walk in and defile it. It would be very bad if you walked in and defiled it, or so forth like this. And this is why you got the instructions of the priests to basically essentially kill anyone who comes in where they shouldn't go, right? Because you're breaching sacred space. And so you got this aspect of, this is where the heavens and the earth and they mesh together, and this is where they interlock, and this is the dangerous place where you meet the divine. So you know, you've got all of these priestly garments and so forth like that. So obviously one of the roles of the priesthood is to keep that sanctity and keep the stranger out. Now track back to the cherubim in Genesis chapter 3. The role of the cherubim with their swords was to keep anyone who shouldn't be going into sacred space out. So their role is very comparable to the role of the priesthood. And if you notice in the sin of the golden calf, when Moses comes back down the mountain, the Levites rally to his side, but what do they pick up? They pick up swords. And so they're now going to take the role of the cherubim, and they're going to guard the sacred space. And so again, this all goes back to Eden imagery. You got the imagery of the cherubim there already, but the actual function goes now to the priests, and they're going to protect the way to the holy place. So every part of creation would be ideally represented in the clothing of the high priest. And even the sky and the earth was represented, as Josephus informs us. So again, this is going to be Josephus. Now the vestment of the high priest being made of linen signified the earth. The blue denoted the sky, being like lightning in its pomegranates, and in the noise of the bells resembling thunder. And for the ephod, it showed that God had made the universe of 4 elements. And as for the gold interwoven, I suppose it related to the splendor by which all things are enlightened. The key here is that every element of the temple stroke priesthood is being associated with creation. The high priest acting as the new Adam within an Eden restored, renewed universe. The tabernacle stroke temple is the place where creation is rescued and restored, the place where the heavens and the earth come and mesh together. The high priest sums it up in himself, all creation. And this is also part of the role of the Messiah as high priest. So this is going to be from Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10. In regard to the dispensation of the fullness of the times, to bring into one the whole in the Messiah, both the things in the heavens and the things upon the earth in him. So the idea is that he's the one who brings together all things in himself. And this is really high priestly imagery. They're getting this idea from the high priest and the tabernacle, because obviously it represents as a microcosm of the universe, and it joins everything together in a harmony. And so basically to look at the Messiah is to look at the high priest, is to look at the microcosm of the universe, and to bring everything in the heavens and the earth together into one. And so in that you've got the kind of like body language where the Apostle Paul says we're all one body. And this is highly reminiscent of what Philo says about the role of the high priest, how he brings everyone into one body. And so again, these are high priestly categories that link back to the Torah. Anyway, comments, suggestions, opinions, insults?
Yep. So, yeah, I think the imagery is very interesting. Now the pomegranates that are mentioned is like in my head I'm just imagining like the fruit pomegranate is it a different word or different meaning for pomegranate?
As far as I know, it just means like the pomegranate, the like the fruit pomegranate.
Okay.
As far as I know, I don't know of anything. I mean, sorry, go.
There's another it's like in 1 Kings 7:20 that talks about the pomegranates as well, but being that there were pomegranate there are 200 pomegranates in rows around the capital, which is, it seems to allude to the same kind of imagery of the robe.
Yeah, I mean, when Josephus is talking about the pomegranates, he links it to lightnings and the noise of the bells resembling the thunder. And if you think about the imagery of the return of the Messiah, in the gospel, sometimes it has this kind of thunder and lightning kind of feel to it. And so basically, you could couch the return of the Messiah in a very high priestly kind of context. I'll give you an example. In the Gospels, the cleansing of the temple, what's known as the cleansing of the temple, when the Messiah goes into the temple and casts out the money changers, this isn't just simply him just being bad-tempered and just throwing over a few tables and casting out money changers. You've got to realize, in the first century, they would have viewed that temple as a microcosm of the universe. Any action in the temple would therefore have been multiplied, and so in meaning. And so doing the kind of thing that he's doing in the temple, it would have repercussions in a very metaphorical term, obviously, but in context of all creation itself. And so he comes in riding on a donkey. He then comes to the temple and then he casts out the merchants. Well, if you compare that to his return, his eventual return, when he comes back, he's going to come riding on a cloud, and then he's going to put right creation. And so basically you've got there right in the Gospels kind of a mini picture of his return and how it's going to affect all creation. Because if you notice in the narrative in the Matthew chapter 21, for instance, etc., the blind and the lame come to the temple and they're healed. And you've got this allusion in the Gospel of John. He says, "You shall not make my house a house of merchants." Well, if you're switched on and you know your scriptures very well, you know that he's alluding to Zechariah chapter 14, because in Zechariah chapter 14, there's an expectation that the merchants will be cast out of the temple, and there'll be holiness then associated with the temple. And so he's pointing you through that language to these kind of eschatological times when the Most High is going to return and restore the purity of the temple, and he's going to fix creation to the point where even the nations now come up to Jerusalem and worship at the Feast of Tabernacles. So this is very provocative imagery that the Gospels have if you understand the temple to be a microcosm of the universe, because it has repercussions for your understanding of how what it means for his return and things like this.
I think that's very powerful stuff. Just being the temple, being anything that happens in the temple is amplified in its meaning. And I mean, you have Adam, essentially original, where just the actions of the high priest, essentially, but the actions of one inside that temple of Eden ended in the downfall of all of mankind. So just the one action just being amplified over all of creation, and the same thing kind of progresses through generations as well.
It's good that you mentioned Adam, because actually in the Gospels, in the same narrative, in Matthew chapter 21, and also it's alluded to in the Gospel of John, there's a citation of Psalms chapter 8. This is very, very significant, because chapter 8 has creation language in it, to the point where it talks about how man was meant to have dominion over all creation, right? And so Psalms chapter 8 is cited in the very chapter that deals with the account of the cleansing of the temple. And in the Gospel of John, there's an allusion. In the Gospel of John, if I remember correctly, I'm doing this from memory, he casts out the oxen and the sheep. This wording is very, very important, because in the Greek, in the Septuagint Greek of Psalms chapter 8, it's actually worded the same. And so in Psalms chapter 8, it talks about how Adam, or the Son of Man, has dominion over the animals plus the oxen and the sheep. So by driving out the oxen and the sheep in the Gospel of John, it's pointing you to Psalms chapter 8, which has creation overtones, and it demonstrates the authority that Adam was meant to have over all creation. So within the Gospels, these things are coming together. They're merging together into one. Adam and High Priest are merging into one, and they're fixing creation.
Yeah, I like that. I need to make a this is just a side note for me right now, but I think it'd be really cool, and perhaps you can help, and anyone else who's in here who wants to, I'll make it an open Google Doc, but just grabbing all the different parts of creation or the vestments, and then having a separate categories for Earth, Eden, the temple, and just being able to list out all of the similarities between, each one being more micro. So Earth, Eden, temple, and high priest, and the imagery that's associated with each one, just so we can see it more side by side. So if anyone's interested in that, let me know. Just put it in Parsha Talk or DM me or something, and I'll give you edit permissions for that. And we can work on that together this week if you are interested. The other point that was made is that I believe Aaron had to wear the bells so that he would not die when he entered. I'm assuming that's similar to the other priests acting as cherubim, or would this be more for like his safety outside of the priests? Like the cherubim are more like angels who are just kind of protecting the area, and only the one with the bells could actually enter in.
This is a good question of what's the function here? What's that doing there? So if for instance Josephus is right and he connects the bells to thunder, right? Think of Sinai. When the Most High came down onto Sinai, what happened? They had a lot of thunder. The mountain smoked. So is this some way, shape, or form kind of mimicking what we're seeing at Sinai? Because remember, the temple is going to be on top of a mountain, and that mountain is going to be the highest mountain over all the mountains. Okay, so you got this mountain imagery that's very, very central, and if you think about a mountain for a moment and think about the temple, a mountain is basically three parts. You got the summit, you got the trunk of the mountain, and you got the very base of the mountain. And the temple was divided into three parts: the Holy of Holies, the holy place, and the outer court. And so basically the mountain there is a representation of the tabernacle or the temple with the specific parts. Because if you remember in the narrative in Exodus chapters 19 to 24, the people weren't allowed to break through. They weren't allowed to go up that mountain, right? It's sacred space. And no one ascends that mountain unless Moses goes up. So Moses is really acting as the high priest at that point. And he goes up to the summit, i.e. the Holy of Holies. And so again, you've got temple imagery just below the surface when it comes to mountain imagery. And this is why you've got also this close association in the prophets, like Isaiah chapter 2, where the temple is on a mountain. The two are entwined together, and so much so. So when it comes to like, what does the bells represent? What does the noise of the bells represent? One possibility is maybe it's kind of reenacting what you're seeing at Sinai. That is a possibility, I would say.
Would you, yeah, I guess the ones who are, I'm trying to think of how to word this. Aaron needing to wear the bells is for most likely protection against or a warning or some kind of protection against I guess the holiness that was there. This is it.
Yeah,
I'm trying to find
unfortunately we're not told all of the details, and sometimes the sources are kind of vague and sparse and things like this. So when it comes to the function of like the minutia of this little bit over here and that little bit over there, we're not told all of the information. And so what I tend to do, I kind of stop. If I run out of data, I kind of stop and go, okay, I can't go any further. So I personally, I don't have a lot of comments when it comes to this, because I've kind of run out of data and I go stop.
Yeah, just I find it odd. It's just like when he enters or exits, he needs to have the sound be heard so that he doesn't die. And it's just like, okay, where is that going? Why? Like, since everything in the Torah is, every word is important and it has meaning, it seems like it's there for a reason.
Yeah, he's probably mimicking something, I would say.
Yeah.
It's probably and one place we come across the idea of sound is Sinai with the thunder. So could it be something to do with that? It could be.
Okay. I will write that one down.
I like to give it a name, like an Easter egg that we have to find.
I'd like to start like awarding points if anyone can provide commentary for like the verses where we have little information off the top of our heads.
Yeah, this could be something good for anybody who's Orthodox Jew.
True.
They can give us their perspective, possibly. If only we knew some Orthodox Jews.
So I'm going to point you to also this imagery as well, okay? So 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 25, right? This is going to be in relation to Psalms chapter 8. But listen, see what happens here. For it's right for him to reign until he puts all the hostile ones under his feet. The last hostile thing made to cease is death, for he subjected all things under his feet. But when he says that all things have been subjected, it is plain that it accepts him who has been subjected all things to him. So there's actually two citations here. One is from Psalms 110 and one is from Psalms 8. And there's a concentration there of under the feet. This under the feet imagery is very, very important, because in Genesis chapter 1, Adam is to radar. To radar is to tread down. And that's how he gains dominion. He treads down to gain dominion. And so when you get to Genesis chapter 3, if you notice the judgment against the seed of the woman, the serpent is going to bruise or crush the heel of the seed of the woman. Now, why the heel, right? The heel is connected to the foot, and the foot is used to step down to get dominion. And so the idea there in Genesis 3 is that the dominion of the seed of the woman will be impeded or resisted. And then there's going to be a victory. And so this really tracks back to Genesis 1, where Adam was to radah, to tread down. And so this feet imagery is then associated with the Messiah, because you've got this last Adam, first Adam theology. And in fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Adam is specifically mentioned. And so basically, again, even the idea of dominion is Adamic in nature through the idea of this treading down. And when you bring in Psalms 110, in Psalms 110, you get the idea of priestly imagery, Melchizedek. And so again, Adam, priestly imagery, and treading down are all merging into one now. And so when the Messiah now treads down and gains dominion, it actually elevates his enemies, because his enemies now, in effect, take on the idea of a sacrifice. They become a sacrifice. And in the prophetic material, in like places like Isaiah and Ezekiel and I believe it elsewhere as well, the judgment of the nations is couched in terms of a sacrifice. When the Most High comes back, it uses the specific word for sacrifice. He's going to judge the nations in the form of a sacrifice. And so basically, when the Messiah returns in Revelation 19, he comes back to perform this high priestly judgment of this sacrifice that you see in the prophets, that the nations will be conquered, will be defeated. And so basically, he's demonstrating not only Adamic qualities through the treading down of his enemies, but also high priestly enemy aspects, because now when he treads down, his enemies are now a sacrifice, and that implies that he's a high priest. So again, it all kind of links all together.
That's really cool. There's so much similarities between it's just in this parsha. It seemed that there's a lot more similarities that I'm starting to link together between creation, Adam, and the whole first Adam, last Adam makes way more sense, and it's starting to kind of unravel. And the more that we dive into all the different things that Adam represented and his role, his intentional role, designed role, and how Jesus is basically the last Adam, or the second Adam, who will return and actually fulfill more of that role. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's all intertwined, and it's beautiful, and I like it. Not so much of any other commentary other than personal opinion here. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to say when it comes to linking at like Adam and how it fits into the narrative of the Torah. Like, for instance, I'll give you a quick example. When you're reading Exodus chapter 1, verse 7, it says that the nation of Israel were fruitful, multiply, and grew exceedingly, and filled the land. This language is Adamic language. You can see this in Genesis 1. Mm-hmm. The implication is that the nation at that point is being set up as a new Adam. Okay, and as I said before, in the prophetic material, you got Isaiah 51 and Ezekiel 36, and it treats the promised land as Eden. And so basically the narrative there is that the Most High is raising up his new Adam in the form of a nation, and he's going to place his new Adam into the promised land, which is the new Eden. And if you think about the creation of Adam for a moment, Adam was formed out of the dust. He was then placed into the garden, right? He wasn't made in the garden. He was created out of the garden and placed into the garden. And so basically this is going to mimic what you see with the nation of Israel. And so they're going to follow the same pattern of Adam, of the creation of Adam. They're created outside, then they're then placed into the garden or into the promised land. And there are other parallels also between Adam and the nation. For instance, Adam was given a commandment which he broke. He was then exiled. The nation of Israel was given a commandment which they broke, then they were exiled. And so they mimic Adam. And this is all really part of many, many spirals of setting up a new Adam that we're seeing in the Torah and in the Tanakh. And I can give you many more examples, like with King Solomon, with Noah. They're all being set up as this new Adam, but ultimately they fail at some point, and then therefore it necessitates another Adam to be risen up.
The same verbiage seems to be used with Noah as well, almost
Yes,
being a
yep.
wouldn't say the last Adam, but a second Adam of sorts.
Yep. Philo says this pretty much explicitly.
Okay.
Believe it or not. He says, for all intents and purposes, we understand Noah to be as the first man again. And also, on top of that, he says, we understand also that this is a new creation, or a second creation. So they're understanding that the spiral begins with Adam and flows over to Noah, and then obviously it keeps going. I would say within Genesis also, there's two characters within Genesis that I would focus in on as well. It's Adam and Joseph. There's parallels between the two. And so the dominion that Adam was meant to have, Joseph actually gets at the very end, because all the nations become subservient to Egypt, and so he's exalted in power. And basically, you got the retelling of the story. Just different people play the different roles. In the story of Joseph, the Most High, Pharaoh plays the role of the Most High. He exalts Joseph, he clothes him, and he gives him a wife, right? And so this is very reminiscent of what you see in Genesis 1-3, where Adam is given a wife, and he's also clothed and things like this, and he's given authority and so forth like this. And so basically, Joseph there is let's say, like a chiastic structure, is being compared to Adam. And so, like, everything that Adam was meant to be, Joseph ends up being through the story. And so this is an example of how the Most High is going to raise up his new Adam, right? That this Adam goes through travail, but then he's exalted, and then he's given the dominion that Adam was meant to have. And this really serves as the framework for, the understanding of the Messiah, that he would be humbled, but then exalted, and then given the authority of Adam.
Is this why, Aaron being the high priest, just with a similar language, and I'd be way off, but Aaron as a high priest, because, or alluding back to like Exodus 7:1, where it says that Moses will be, God to Pharaoh, prophet. Is that similar kind of a relation role, with Aaron being the high priest?
So within the context, we're not quite there yet. We haven't got there yet, but we'll get there eventually. In Exodus chapter 38-39, there are certain Hebrew verses which are very, very reminiscent of the Hebrew that you see in Genesis 1 and 2. And so basically Moses there in Exodus chapter 38-39 is being couched in terms of the Most High at creation, right? And so when they construct the tabernacle, because they're constructing a new universe, the Most High, Moses is playing the role of the Most High in creation. And so you do have these associations, and I know we're not there yet, but when we get to the sin of the golden calf, again, you're going to see parallels to Genesis 1-3. I'll give you a quick synopsis. I won't bore everyone. Basically, Aaron, in the Sin of the Golden Calf episode, Aaron will play the role of Adam. The nation will play the role of Eve. And the Levites will play the role of the cherubim. If you can get that in your head, you've got a repeat of the sin of the garden just coming down the line.
Can you?
And this makes
can you
sense.
repeat that whole section? I'm just gonna add that to the notes.
Yeah, and this makes sense if you think about it, right? You see creation being made, and then you see a fall. What you're seeing with these instructions is how to build a new creation, and then you see a fall scene, right? So it seems to be mimicking the flow of what you're seeing in Genesis. It's setting up a new creation, but then there's a fall, right? And so again, it's back to the idea that Genesis 1-3 is the interpretive key for the Tanakh. But there's so much more that you could say, but I think we're getting behind a bit.
Oh yeah, true. All right, I'll go into Exodus 29 since we have one last, I guess mostly one last chapter, I think, and then a little bit on the next one. Okay, Exodus 29 is consecration of the priests. Now this is what you are to do to consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests. Take a young bull and 2 rams without blemish, along with unleavened bread, unleavened cakes mixed with oil, and unleavened wafers anointed with oil. Make them of fine wheat flour, put them in a basket, and present them in a basket along with the bull and the 2 rams. Then present Aaron and his sons at the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. Take the garments and clothe Aaron with a tunic, the robe of the ephod itself, and the breastplate. Fasten the ephod on him with its woven waistband. Put the turban on his head and attach the holy diadem to the turban. Then take the anointing oil and anoint him by pouring it on his head. Present his sons as well and clothe them with the tunics. Wrap the sashes around Aaron and his sons and tie headbands on them. The priesthood shall be theirs by a permanent statute. In this way, you are to ordain Aaron and his sons. And that was the end of it. Just one, I guess, comment here. Aside from everything being very repetitive in a sense, because we see the blue, the purple, fine linen, everything is always fine everything. It's the best of. But also it mentions numerous times that these things, the priesthood, and in other chapter, the previous chapter, there's other things that were always a permanent statute. But makes that very, very clear that all of this is permanent every time. So I just find that just an interesting observation.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with the Hebrew word olam, and unfortunately, it can mean different things. So it can mean it depends on the context. Hebrew is a very contextual language, right? So like Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for olam, right? Obviously, it wasn't in there forever, and so really, it can also relate to a finite period of time. And you do have this you have different views about the longevity of olam. That's what I would say. So when it comes to the ordination of the priests, this is where the Torah becomes somewhat cryptic, because you've really got to think about where are we in the narrative. Okay, so the sin of the golden calf is still a few chapters away. That hasn't happened yet. And the selection as the Levites as priests has not yet come into focus. So, that narrative isn't, well, if you're going chronologically, it's not there yet. From Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 8-9, it is inferred that the Levites were given the role of the priesthood because of the incident at Horeb and the sin of the golden calf. At any rate, this means that Aaron and his sons were being separated out from the nation of priests, Exodus 19, with a further separation later on of the Levites, either at the location of the sin of the golden calf or which takes place in the wilderness, Numbers 3 and 8. If we think about the actions of the Levites in Exodus 32 after the sin of the golden calf, in that they did not regard their mothers, fathers, or brothers, and this is what Deuteronomy says about the Levites. And of Levi he said, your Thummim and your Urim are for your devout man whom you tested at Massa. You contended with him at the waters of strife, who said of his father and his mother, hang on a minute, and I have not seen him, and he has not acknowledged his brothers, and did not know his own son, for they have kept your word and observed your covenant. So if we ponder about that for a moment, that the Levites, when they rallied to the call of Moses at the sin of the golden calf, they didn't regard their family members. And so when we compare this type of understanding to what the Gospel of Luke says, for instance, and the Gospel of Luke says this: if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and besides even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. So where's he getting this ethic from? Well, it seems to be that the Messiah is placing his disciples on par with the Levites, who even disregarded their own family members for their calling. So no wonder then we're called a holy priesthood. And so right there in the text of the Gospels, there may be slight indications that he's elevating his disciples to the level of priesthood, to the extent of that he's making a comparison between the Levites, who didn't regard their own family members to bring about judgment and so and to heed the call of the Most High, to his own disciples who are heeding the call of the gospel, so to speak. So, comments, suggestions, opinions?
I don't have anything for this one. Yellow or Dean? Dean?
No, I don't have anything.
All right. Okay, I'll just pull up the next part then. We're on food for priests. 29. No, that's way further. Order of sacrifices. 38. Daily offerings. Am I missing a section here?
So if you're on daily offerings, it's Exodus 29, 38 to 46. I don't know if you finished a bit tad early on the ordination of priests, because that was 1 to 37.
Yeah, I think we got the ordination of the priests, but then yeah, I might have ended that early because there's the order of sacrifices and food for priests, which are not sectioned in here.
We can skip to daily offerings if you want, or we can just read to the end of the previous. It's up to you. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I'll do just a quick read through. If anyone's got any comments, I don't think that we have any in the notes, but yeah, if anyone wants to talk about it, they can. So order of the sacrifices, you are to present the bull at the front of the tent of the meetings, and Aaron and his sons are to lay their hands on its head. You shall slaughter the bull before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Take some of the blood of the bull and put it on the horns of the altar with your finger, and then pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Take all the fat that covers the entrails and the lobe of the liver, and both kidneys with the fat on them, and burn them on the altar. But burn the flesh of the bull and its hide and dung outside of the camp. It is a sin offering. Take one of the rams, and Aaron and his sons shall lay their hands on its head. You are to slaughter the ram, take its blood, and sprinkle it on all sides of the altar. Cut the ram into pieces, wash the entrails and legs, and place them with its head and other pieces. Then burn the entire ram on the altar. It is a burnt offering to the Lord, a pleasing aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Take the second ram, and Aaron and his sons are to lay their hands on its head. Slaughter the ram, take some of its blood, and put it on the right earlobes of Aaron and his sons, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Sprinkle the remaining blood on all sides of the altar. And take some of the blood on the altar, and some of the anointing oil, and sprinkle it on Aaron and his garments, and as well as on his sons and their garments. and he and his garments will be consecrated, as well as his sons and their garments. Take the fat from the ram, the fat tail, fat covering the entrails, and the lobe of the liver, both kidneys, the fat on them, the right thigh, since this is a ram for ordination, along with 1 loaf of bread, 1 cake of bread made with oil, and 1 wafer from the basket of unleavened bread, that is before the Lord. Put all these things in the hands of Aaron and his sons, and wave them before the Lord as a wave offering. Then take them from their hands and burn them on the altar atop of the burnt offering as a pleasing aroma before the Lord. It is an offering made by fire to the Lord. Take the breast of the ram of Aaron's ordination and wave it before the Lord as a wave offering, and it will be your portion. Consecrate for Aaron and his sons the breast of the wave offering that is waved, and the thigh of the heave offering that is lifted up from the ram of ordination. This will belong to Aaron and his sons as a regular portion from the Israelites, for it is the heave offering the Israelites will make to the Lord from their peace offerings. The holy garment that belongs to Aaron will belong to his sons after him, so they can be anointed and ordained in them. The son who succeeds him as priest and enters the tent of meeting to minister in the holy place must wear them for 7 days. That is the end of that section. There's a lot of quick commentary here, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I see a lot of resemblance here between like how the priests are supposed to be kind of like anointed with blood on the hands, feet, head, and similarly, imagery from Christ as well. But Dean, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so I have a few questions in this one specifically. I don't know if we're going to get into the offerings too much.
We can.
Okay, I wanted to get in detail a little bit about why the different offerings and what do they represent, and then possibly look into why they waive certain animal products and what does that represent.
These are really good questions.
Those are the questions I've always had, and they're just like, I don't think anybody has an answer for it, but I could be surprised here.
So, firstly, some people draw an analogy through the ordination. If you notice, there's a concentration on the right side, and some draw an analogy between the cleansing of the leper. Okay, so in Leviticus chapter 13, 14, one of the things that you do with a cleansed leper is it's very, very similar to the ordination of the priests. You concentrate on their right side. And so some make a link between that and the ordination of the priesthood. The central idea there is that the leper is now being elevated back to the status of the community. And so you've got this aspect of holiness coming back and being able to participate again in the context of the community. Now, when it comes to what do these offerings actually mean, this is like an excellent question, but unfortunately, this is where our sources kind of stop. And the sources become very, very sparse as to what did these offerings actually mean. If the temple was a microcosm of all the universe, and the high priest was a microcosm of the universe, and they're in effect imitating the divine at creation, then what are these? Why are they making offerings of these types? Why the different? This offering over here, that offering over there, etc., etc. So, one of the sources that we have comes from Philo, and he seems to again connect the idea of animals to creation, and he says something like this: "And the natures of the animals above mentioned have an intimate connection with the parts of the universe. The ox is connected with the earth as being an animal employed in drawing the plough and in tilling the earth. The goat again is connected to with the water, being an animal driven, deriving its name from driving and rushing on. And the ram is connected with the air, and then he connects the birds also to the idea of the heavens. And so there, Philo is connecting these animals to actually creation themselves, just like he's connecting the temple and and priesthood to creation. But there are other aspects to this. So one of the main ideas behind when you offer something, you're offering really that which is that you've got from something that's fertile. So you're giving your gratitude because you have fertile land, right? Obviously, you need a fertile land to be able to make offerings in the first place, right? And so basically, when you make offerings, you're saying thank you for the fertility of the land, and this has been dedicated to your use. So there's another aspect to this, and it goes back to Genesis. Genesis 1 was understood in the context of birth, and I mean that in a very real way. When they thought about the mountains, when they thought about the seas, when they thought about Adam, they understood those things in context of being birthed, actually birthed. And there's a couple of verses I'll quickly go through. So the sea, for instance, sorry, we'll start with the mountains. Psalms 90, chapter 90, verse 2. The psalmist says this: before the mountains were born, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. So here the psalmist talks about mountains, but the mountains are being born. Job similarly says this when he's talking about the seas, or who shut up the sea with doors? When it burst out, it came forth from the womb. So the sea comes from a womb. What? And the mountains are born. So the central idea is that Genesis 1 is talking about fertility and birth. And so to bring animal offerings and produce of the ground is to bring that which is birthed or fertile before the Most High. And so when it comes to the Messiah, if you notice, he's connected with lamb imagery, but he's also connected with first fruit imagery in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So he's the first fruit of the land, but he's also this animal imagery at the same time, yet he's an offering. And so again, you've got this idea of everything is being summed up in the Messiah. The heavens and the earth are being summed up in him. The animal kingdom is being summed up in him. And so basically he's representing again all of creation. And so I think that if you're making offerings in the context of a tabernacle stroke temple, and that temple is a microcosm of all the universe, I think that those offerings have some indication or connection to creation itself, and possibly represent creation in kind of the way that Philo's saying. So again, it's really cosmic significance that's going on here. And then you've got the idea of the priests slaying the animal and dividing the animal, right? If you think back to creation again, creation is a series of separations. It's a series of in-betweens, right? And so this very act of making a separation of the various different animal parts could again represent the Most High at creation making a separation, if that makes sense.
And also I just put in
I saw the list of offerings there.
I was just trying to like gather them all together and pop them in there, but those would be all the offerings. I also included the red heifer one, which would be required for the Messiah's return. So that's in there, and it doesn't really give you too much insight on like why these animals or anything, but just what each offering was for.
Well, I think the next section here kind of goes into my question a little bit further. I mean, not like Nazarene didn't answer it either, but we'll just be reviewing it again.
Oh, these are part of the insults now, right?
See, I did ask.
It happens. It happens.
Okay, so I'll just jump into that one then. The food for the priests. You are to take the ram of ordination and boil its flesh in a holy place. At the entrance of the tent of meeting, Aaron and his sons are to eat the meat of the ram and the bread that is in the basket. They must eat those things by which atonement was made for their ordination and consecration. But no outsider may eat them, because these things are sacred. And if the meat of ordination or any bread is left until the morning, you are to burn up the remainder. It must not be eaten because it is sacred. This is what you are to do for Aaron and his sons based on all that I have commanded you, taking 7 days to ordain them. Sacrifice a bull as a sin offering each day for atonement. Purify the altar by making atonement for it, and anoint it to consecrate it. For 7 days you shall make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. Then the altar will become most holy. Whatever touches the altar will be holy. And just reading through this one again, once again, imagery. But you must not eat the things by which the atonement was made for the ordination. Or sorry, no outsider may eat them because these things are sacred. Which kind of also goes into, I think this is the only mention of this would be in the Didache, but or the Didache, which is where it's saying that only those who are baptized can partake in the sacraments, and not to let anyone who is not participate in it. And I'm wondering if that's pulled primarily from like it being a sacred thing or seen as a sacred thing, and then moving that same Jewish perspective of sacred only belongs to the consecrated. And in the Didache sense, the doing the bread and the wine, and relating that to being a holy or a sacred thing that only pertains to the sacred people or the saints.
Yeah. When it comes to this, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the phrase the table of the Lord, or the table of Yod-Heh-Vav, is used, and this particular phrase is actually found in Malachi, when it's talking about the table of Yod-Heh-Vav. And so there seems to be an allusion to that type of context where when you eat of the bread and the body, it's in the context of a sacrificial kind of offering or context, or temple context. And so when the Didache is saying that type of thing, I think it's perfectly logical that it's associating some type of priestly element to when you eat it, you have to be cleansed to eat it. So I think, as far as I understand the Didache, it probably is kind of going in that direction, I would say.
Means it's sacrificial food, or a representation of a sacrifice, and thus being sacrifice, it alludes to you have to be. Yeah. I'd say that's a very rational approach to it. So no problem with that. Yeah, and it makes sense that is who would be allowed to partake in the sacrifice. Okay. Any other comments, questions, anything for the food part? If not, move into the daily offerings.
No insults here.
Okay, good.
So hopefully you weren't waiting on me.
Oh, I just heard your mic moving around, so I thought maybe you're preparing a long speech. Okay, daily offerings. This is what you are to offer regularly on the altar each day. 2 lambs that are a year old. Offer 1 lamb in the morning and the other one at twilight. With the first lamb, offer 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with 1/4 hin of oil from the pressed olives, and a drink offering of 1/4 hin of wine. And offer the second lamb at twilight with the same grain offering and drink offering as in the morning, as a pleasing aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. For the generations to come, this burnt offering shall be made regularly at the entrance of the tent of meeting before the Lord, where I will meet you and speak with you. I will also meet with the Israelites there, and that place will be consecrated by my glory. So I will consecrate the tent of meeting and the altar, and I will consecrate Aaron and his sons to serve me as priests.
Yeah, so when it comes to this, I've actually read the commentary already. I jumped the gun. So So again, we've got the establishment of the daily offerings within the tabernacle, and through the division of the animals and the separation of the specific animal parts, are they mimicking creation again? Where the Most High divides at creation. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of other stuff in creation that we haven't even got to, like for instance, how the first 3 days of creation have a counterpart in the last 3 days, and how the division of which we see in the days of creation also mimics aspect of redemption when it comes to Genesis chapter 3. Because if you notice in Genesis chapter 3, you've got a series in betweens again between the seed of the woman and between the seed of the serpent, and it uses this between language. And in the Hebrew, again, this Hebrew for between is used in Genesis 1 when it's talking about the specific betweening of the parts, like between night and day and so forth like this. And so basically in Genesis chapter 3, when you get this story of that the seed of the woman will bruise the head of the serpent and the serpent will crush or bruise the heel of the serpent, you've got this kind of between language that's kind of there as well. And so basically it's couching redemption in terms of this kind of between language, like separation. And so it's linking, I would say, redemption to creation together. And when you really ponder that and you think about context like the Exodus, when they go into the Red Sea actually mimics the first 3 days of creation. You get this idea of darkness and light between the Israelites and the Egyptians, and then the seas part and the dry ground appears. So you got the parting of the seas, which is in correlation to day 2 of creation, where you got the heavens above and below, the parting, and then you got the appearance of the dry ground on day 3 of creation. So again, fundamentally, this idea of separation, I think is really, really important to kind of focus in on as well, because like redemption and creation now become merged together. And so this is why the Apostle Paul, when he's writing his epistles, he links the idea of new creation to salvation. Why is he doing that? Because fundamentally it's there in the Torah. You've got this close association between redemption and creation that's really connected together. And so he's using that in the epistles as well when he's talking about the gospel and what the Messiah has done, etc., etc.
Just gonna check this footnote. There's always good stuff in footnotes. Sacrifice of this goes back to the other one. Sacrifice a bull as a sin offering each day for atonement, and it's saying, or it's possibly a purification offering. Interesting. Would there be a difference between purification offering and a sin offering? A sin offering would be to purify.
Unfortunately, these terms, the idea of purification and cleansing, even within scholarship, they don't quite understand what these terms actually mean. There's currently this debate within scholarship about, what function because some scholarship there we go. Well, these terms relate to like purging or cleansing, but some will go no. It refers to atonement. And so there's this divide within scholarship, and they're still trying to figure out what the function of these terms are. And you're going to have different views within scholarship about how to actually translate the actual words themselves, right? And we're working off the English, and that's problematic already, about what these terms mean. So I don't have a lot of comments as to the intricacies of, well, this word means this and that word means this, because technically not even the scholarship have really figured that out yet.
Is there a difference between purification and sanctification, or Am I saying that right?
Uh,
Or we just don't have that? Is that just go into like there's a disagreement and there's no real truth to one or the other at the moment?
it's it it's difficult because we'd have to get into the minutiae of what words are you associating them with.
Mhm.
And so to kind of speak in kind of vagaries like in English as we're doing is very, very difficult because these English words relate to Hebrew words, and sometimes the Hebrew words are very, very different from each other, and then they need to be really thought upon. And so that's more of like a wider discussion, and we would be here for hours.
Okay. Noted. Nazarene does not have hours.
Yeah, is there anything special about, and if this is going to be a too long of a discussion, we can take it off on the offline chat, but I guess the significance of the Mashiach being a lamb sacrifice and the
Mhm.
role of a lamb in the offerings.
Well, here's the conundrum. Okay, here's the conundrum. In Corinthians, the Messiah is called our Passover. Okay, when we look at the Torah, what does it explicitly directly say concerning the Passover? Is the Passover technically a sin offering? The answer would be no, not technically. And so this is where things get a bit tricky in trying to overlap imagery and bring all of these things together. But I would say this: if the Messiah is a microcosm of all the universe, this means it isn't just a simple association for one anymore. This means that he encapsulates all of the imageries together in himself. And so to try and associate in the sense of the Passover is not a sin offering, that's technically true. Yet the Messiah is our Passover offering and our sin offering at the same time, or atonement at the same time.
Because he does represent all of creation.
Yes, exactly. And so I would point to kind of like the greater narrative there, that he actually sums up all of creation itself, and therefore it acts as an atonement on that basis through the imagery of the high priest. And so really the imagery of the lamb is really one expression of that, right? It's not fundamentally the only expression, but it's a expression of that. So I would approach it in that kind of way. And to make things even more complicated for you, when the Tanakh speaks, it can speak in contradictory metaphors. It is. I can give you an example of this if you want. I'll give you an example of this within the Torah to show you the kind of complexities there are. So here we go. 60. Where are you?
Put your seatbelts on, kids.
Yeah. It's only a short verse, maybe 2 verses. Okay, here we go. So I'm pointing to Isaiah chapter 62. In Isaiah 62, the Most High is speaking to Zion. And you can see this beginning at verse 1. And he's talking about her redemption, okay? And we get to verse 4. You no longer shall be called forsaken, nor shall your land any longer be called desolate. But you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married. For Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh delights in you, and your land is married. For as a young man marries a virgin, so your sons marry you. Okay? So you've got to think about that imagery for a moment. Zion, in the context of Isaiah, is a mother, and she has sons. And you can see this, for instance, in Isaiah 54. And so here in the prophet Isaiah, Zion, the mother, is going to marry her sons. But hang on a minute. According to the Torah, sons wouldn't be able to marry their mothers, and so there are instances in the Tanakh where this type of imagery is given, but it's contradictory imagery. If you really thought it through and you compared it to what the Torah is saying, you'd go, well, hang on a minute, that's a bit contradictory, right? And so when it gets to this notion of the Messiah is the Passover lamb, but he's also atonement. Again, you've got this mixing of mixing of ideas, okay, and it's contradictory. It's contradictory on the surface because the Passover is not atonement, but because you've got this wider context of priestly aspect and temple aspect, it's more encapsulating, and therefore kind of the imagery kind of fits within that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes. I think it brings a lot more meaning to Mashiach when you have him as a representation of all of creation, or at least a not a representation of, but like a spokesperson for. If I don't know if that's the correct word, but yeah, having him be everything, and so his death also in that same sense would have been amplified over all of creation.
Yes.
So yeah, it has a lot more meaning to it, and makes a lot more sense as to why a death would have atoned. In that
Yeah,
sense.
I mean it's grander in scope now. Yeah, it's not just simply atoning for humans. It's really how to put all of creation right, and that's the key, right?
Right.
And that fundamentally it tracks back to Adam. Adam sinned. He took all of creation down with him. All of creation. It's in the bondage of decay, and so that reasoning is evidenced in the high priest. His actions affect all creation.
Yeah.
Voila, you've got it.
That's cool.
May I ask a question? Is that okay?
100%.
I don't know if I'm going to formulate this well, Naz, so please bear with me. Because I don't know if you remember the discussions we had about Mark Nanos and how he separates sort of like the nations from Israel. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, so from a step by step, from moving from the center to the outward, if you will, sort of what does that look like in regards to sort of progress of redemption? Does my question make sense? Do you get an idea of what I'm saying? Or does it sound weird?
Here's the thing, right? And I haven't got the quote at hand, okay? When Philo talks about the high priest, he couches the nations or the people in terms of one body. Okay, one body. This is very familiar language, right? And because the apostles speak about the Messiah in the context of one body, right? And so when it comes to the nations, obviously the high priest represents not only Israel, but all of the nations as well and all of creation. And so you do have this unifying aspect to bring all together. And so really it is grander in scope. It's extending outwards even to the nations to bring them closer and place them into one body. So you do have this kind of joining together of one body and one people. So I don't know if that helps answer your question, but
yeah. Sorry, can I reframe it sort of not as a question, but sort of so from the beginning, sort of from an imagery perspective, and again, I apologize if my imagery or question is rudimentary. From the beginning, then there was this aspect of rescuing everything in a sense to like simplify it into potato language, rather than there sort of being like a progression of at this point. This redeems this, and this redeems that, and that redeems that. Is it like an all-encompassing then image of I'm going to redeem everything, and the failure of that through the cycle of mankind up to Messiah who begins like kind of the totality of redemption.
Yeah, I'm going to use Paul's example in Romans chapter 5. If sin came by one man, then redemption would come by one man. So it's basically that's the fundamental logic. It's tracking it back to Adam, right? Because if one person affects all of creation, i.e., if Adam affects all of creation, then whoever's going to bring the ultimate redemption has to somehow affect all of creation, not just mankind, but all of creation. And so from the very beginning, if that went wrong with Adam and he fell and all the creation came down with him, then that needs correcting. And so that's why you've got this kind of first Adam, last Adam kind of theology. If the first Adam did that and caused that through that one action, then the one action of the high priestly Adam is going to correct that, right? So it's one correcting the other. So, but they're the same type of thing, right? One person affects all creation, and they kind of link together.
Right. Yeah, I'll move into the next part here, which also goes into Mashiach stuff. But God will dwell among the people. I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God who brought them out of the land of Egypt so that I might dwell among them, for I am the Lord their God. And that would conclude Exodus 29.
So, okay, I've got this citation from Philo, right? And he's going to talk about the high priest. And I want you to note the language, okay? Because this is very reminiscent of what the apostles say about the Messiah. So and it's quite a long quote, so bear with me. Not as a bear with me. Moreover, I said, he has appointed a time for their return and the death of the high priest for the following reason. As the relations of each individual who has been slain treacherously lie in wait to secure themselves revenge and justice upon those who treacherously slew him. In like manner, the high priest is the relation and nearest of kin to the whole nation, inasmuch as he presides over and dispenses justice to all who dispute in accordance with the laws, and offers up prayers and sacrifices every day on behalf of the whole nation, and prays for blessings for the people as for his own brethren and parents and children, that every age and every portion of the nation, as if it were one body, may be united into one, and the same society and union devoted to peace and obedience to the law. So there, when Philo's talking about the high priest, the actions of the high priest is going to cause everyone to become one body. And so this one body language is employed in the epistles when it comes to the Messiah. And so I think that they're using, again, this kind of high priestly category of what the high priest does in relation to the people and bringing the people all together into one body. And I think they're using that category for the Messiah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that definitely brings things together. I'd say previous to doing any kind of Torah study or anything, I also would, I guess, in my previous walk with God in general, where it was more like New Testament focused rather than Old Testament focused. But with the Old Testament in focus primarily in the Torah, and understanding that, I think it just unlocks so much of the New Testament and how everything ties together. And I think it's insane that most churches and people don't focus on the Torah. Even if you don't follow any of the laws of the Torah, you are missing every understanding of the New Testament without Torah. And all the concepts just go right over your head.
Yeah, and this is really why we should study the Torah, because the Torah is trying to give us the logic for the Messiah.
Right. like if you ask someone like, why did Jesus have to die, and it's like what is the purpose, and no one in most churches would even be able to explain it. It's like, well, because we sinned. Okay, but that's not really a why. It doesn't tell you like what's the meaning behind it or anything. Like it's more vague. But when you have this deep understanding of Torah, you start to see all these pieces unlock, and it brings a greater meaning. And really the gospel, the good news, is amazing news. I think good is kind of a underqualifying word to use for the gospel. but yeah, it's like it just brings a fullness to the power and awesomeness of the New Testament. Yeah, and we kind of miss it.
And what's a shame is you could probably do it just reading the first chapter of Genesis and the last chapter of Revelation.
True. But it's so overlooked. It's so overlooked. Okay, we'll move on. Anyone else have any questions before we get into this is the last part of the Torah bits. We have just the altar of incense, and then we move into the next, which is about 1 chapter total. Okay. Altar of incense. You are to make an altar of acacia wood. Say it. How do you say that?
Acacia.
Acacia.
Offsite.
No, never mind.
Okay. I heard my wife like off in the distance. All right. Of wood for burning the incense. It is to be a square, a cubit long, and a cubit wide, and 2 cubits high. Its horn must be of 1 piece. Its horns must be 1 piece. Overlay with pure gold at the top and all sides and horns, and make a molding of the gold around it, and make 2 gold rings below the molding on opposite sides to hold the poles used to carry it. Make the poles of wood and overlay them with gold. Place the altar in front of the veil so that it is before the Ark of the Testimony, or Ark of the Covenant, before the mercy seat that is over the testimony where I will meet you. And Aaron is to burn fragrant incense on it every morning when he tends the lamps. When Aaron sets up the lamps at twilight, he must burn the incense perpetually before the Lord for the generations to come. On this altar you must not offer unauthorized incense, or a burnt offering or grain offering, nor are you to pour a drink offering on it. Once a year, Aaron shall make atonement on the horns of the altar. Throughout your generations, he shall make atonement on it annually with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. The altar is most holy to the Lord.
Right. So, what verse did you finish off there?
That was 31 through 10.
Are you going to do it verse 11? Hang on a minute.
The census offering?
No, I got to verse 11. You got to verse 10, right?
Yeah,
Did you miss a verse?
I don't think so. There's one that just says, "Then the Lord said to Moses," and that would be verse 11.
Oh, okay. That's just weird. Okay, fair enough. Anyway, so we've got the altar of incense.
Oh,
so
hold on. Let me see. You can discuss this. Since I'm using a more English one rather than like the Hebrew Bible, the numbering could be off a little bit. Continue.
So the altar of incense is one such example that was associated with the declaration that the Most High is the possessor of all things. So this is again Josephus, but he's talking about the altar of incense. But the altar of incense, by its 13 kinds of sweet-smelling spices with which the sea replenished, it signified that God is the possessor of all things that are both in the uninhabitable and habitable parts of the earth, and that they are all to be dedicated to his use. Whilst Philo says this other point also is too important to deserve to be passed over in silence, that as there are 3 vessels among the sacred furniture, a candlestick, a bath, and an altar of incense. The altar of incense has reference to that gratitude that is exhibited for the bestowal of the elements. So again, the idea of the altar of incense is to connotate the idea of gratitude before the Most High. So the incense of the altar of incense is connected to prayers. You can see this in Psalms 141 verse 2, and also in Revelation chapter 8 verse 3 and 4. And the smoke acts like a vehicle to transport the prayers. This vehicle aspect of smoke is talked about in Josephus. He describes that the altar that Manoah makes as creating a smoke that acts like a vehicle so that an angel can ascend. So this is what Josephus says about Manoah when he makes an altar and flame and things like this. Which, when they had done, he touched the flesh with the rod which he had in his hand, which upon the breaking out of a flame was consumed together with the loaves. And the angel ascended openly in their sight up to heaven by means of the smoke, as by a vehicle. Now Manoah was afraid that some danger would come to them from the sight of God. But his wife bade him to be of good courage, for that God appeared to them to be for their benefit. So there Josephus is talking about the flame and the smoke that goes up, and he's saying that the smoke acts as a vehicle that the angel ascends. So this shouldn't be too strange, because if you think about the Messiah, when he ascends up, he goes up in a cloud, right? When he comes back, he's going to come back on a cloud. So you do have this kind of cloud imagery and this smoke imagery acting as a transport. And so the smoke that you see in the temple, again, it has a function. It has a kind of transport function that carries up the prayers and like any angels and so forth like this. So the tabernacle was then a fully working microcosm, complete with Adamic high priestly imagery, couched in terms of Eden-like imagery. Every part has a meaning, and that meaning contributes to the stability of all creation. As the words of Shimon indicate, Shimon the righteous was one of the last men of the great assembly. He used to say the world stands upon three things: the Torah, the temple service, and the practice of acts of piety. So again, that just demonstrates the belief that when the priests did what they did, it was contributing to the very stability of the universe. And this is why the temple and the high priest is also being associated with the universe, because it demonstrates stability. That if the temple and the high priest was ever absent, that means there's a real problem for creation itself. And so these things are interlocked and interlinked. And so really that ends my comments for the Torah section.
Alrighty. Questions, insults towards Naz, or anything else? Yeah, I just pulled up the my Torah that's in it's just a Hebrew to English, but I never noticed the portion names are at the top of every page, which is kind of cool.
Aha, learning curve.
So it's like, well, that's fancy. I've never noticed that before. So I was looking for Exodus in the Hebrew, and as I was turning the pages, I was like, oh, there it is. Okay, so let's go into the next portion. While I pull it up, if anyone's got questions, feel free to ask them, even unrelated at the moment. It's going to take me just a second. I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden can't pull up verses. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, so it's not an internet issue.
Let me just catch up. Ezekiel 43. There you go.
There we go. Okay, I've got it now.
Okay, you got it.
Yep. All right. As for you, son of man, describe to the house of Israel the temple, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and that they shall measure the plan. And if they are ashamed of all that they have done, make known to them the designs of the temple, its arrangements, its exits, its entrances, that is, its whole design. And make known to them as well all of its statutes and its whole design and all of its laws, and write it down in their sight, so that they may observe all of its laws and its statutes and carry them out. This is the law of the temple. The whole territory on top of the mountain all around shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the temple. That's I think the intro part. Do you have anything just for that portion, or should I just keep reading all the way through the altar?
It's up to you. I mean, you can keep going. All of my comments are really just sort of condensed, and so I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll wait to the end and then I'll pop in.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I don't think there's too much to add for the just kind of the intro there. The altar. These are the measurements of the altar by cubits. The cubit being a cubit and a hand breadth. Its base shall be 1 cubit high, 1 cubit broad, with a rim of 1 span around its edge. And this shall be the height of the altar, from the base of the ground to the lower edge, 2 cubits, with the breadth of 1 cubit, and from the smaller ledge to the larger edge, 4 cubits, with a breadth of 1 cubit. And the altar hearth, 4 cubits, and from the altar hearth projecting upwards 4 horns. The altar hearth shall be square, 12 cubits long by 12 broad, and the ledge shall be square, 14 cubits long by 14 cubits broad, with a rim around it, half a cubit broad, and its base 1 cubit all around. The steps of the altar shall face east. And then he said to me, Son of man, thus says the Lord God, these are the ordinances for the altar. On the day when it was erected for the burnt offerings upon it, and for throwing blood against it, you shall give to the Levitical priests of the family of Zadok, who draw near to me to minister to me, declares the Lord God, a bull from the herd for a sin offering, and you shall take some of its blood and put it on the 4 horns of the altar, and on the 4 corners of the ledge, and upon the rim all around. Thus you shall purify the altar and make atonement for it. You shall take the bull of the sin offering, and it shall be burned in the appointed place belonging to the temple outside of the sacred area. And on the 2nd day you shall offer a male goat without blemish for a sin offering, and the altar shall be purified as it was purified with the bull. When you have finished purifying it, you shall offer a bull from the herd without blemish, and a ram from the flock without blemish. You shall present them before the Lord, and the priest shall sprinkle salt on them and offer them up as a burnt offering to the Lord. For 7 days you shall provide daily a male goat for a sin offering, also a bull from the herd and a ram from the flock without blemish they shall be provided. 7 days they shall make atonement for the altar and cleanse it, and so consecrate it. And when they have completed these days, then from the 8th day onward, the priest shall offer on the altar your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, and I will accept you, declares the Lord God.
So I'm gonna concentrate on cosmic geography. Okay. So in Ezekiel, the land of Israel is considered to be the navel or the center of the earth, and you can see this in Ezekiel 38:12. When Gog and Magog are going to come and try and destroy the nation, it says this: in order to plunder a plunder and to steal a prize, to turn your hand on the inhabited waste places and on the people gathered out of the nations producing livestock and goods, who dwell in the center of the earth. This is the center of all the nations, and this is also reflected in the temple that is described in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 43:12, the temple is placed on top of a mountain. In other places in the prophets, the temple stroke house is associated with the highest mountain on the earth. This is Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. And it shall be in the last days, the mountain of the house of Yod-Heh-Vaveh shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations flow into it. The temple is then not only the highest point of the earth, but at the very center of it. In the Torah, an altar is said to be made from either uncut stones or earth, Exodus 20, chapter 20, verses 24 to 25. Altar and earth are then linked together. so much so that those who are buried under the land are considered as though they are buried beneath the altar. In Revelation chapter 6, verse 9 and 10, the souls of the people who are seen under the altar. In rabbinic material, this tradition is also seen, and so this is a rabbinic citation. Anyone who's buried in the land of Israel is considered as though he's buried beneath the altar. So they're associating the idea of land, the promised land, with sacredness. And because it's connected to the altar, when someone's buried underneath the land, they're considered as though they're buried underneath the altar. And it continues on like this. It is stated here, an altar of earth you shall make for me. And it is stated there, for he does avenge the blood of his servants and renders vengeance to his adversaries and atones for the land of his people. This teaches that one who is buried beneath the land of Israel is considered as though he is buried beneath the altar in the temple. So this citation here of Deuteronomy 32 in the rabbinic portion there is very, very significant, because when you read Revelation and the souls that are under the altar, they cry out something very, very specific. They say something like this. So this is Revelation chapter 6, verse 10. And they cried with a great voice, saying, until when, holy and true master, do you not judge and take vengeance for our blood from those dwelling on the earth? So this is an allusion to Deuteronomy 32:43, just like we see in the rabbinic material that they're employing Deuteronomy 32:43 when they're talking about being buried underneath the land, connected to being buried beneath to the altar. And so this is what Deuteronomy 32:43 says: rejoice, O nations of his people, for he shall avenge the blood of his servants and shall render vengeance to his foes. And so again, the people are crying out there in Revelation, they're under the altar and they're crying out for vengeance. And this crying out is really an allusion to 32:43. And so basically what's happening is that rabbinic source there is drawing from the same pool of tradition that Revelation is drawing from as well. So they both have a common pool of tradition that they're drawing from, and they're both making the same type of association. So when it comes to cosmic geography, just summary points. Number one, Israel is considered to be the center of the earth. Number two, the temple is the central part of the land and the universe, essentially. And it's on the highest mountain above everyone else. So it's the highest point, but it's also the most centralist point. The actual land itself is considered to be so holy that if you're buried underneath it, it's considered as if you're buried underneath the altar itself. So again, you've got this idea of cosmic significance. It's central, it's high, and it's very, very holy. And all of these elements, again, track back to your conceptions of Eden. Because in Ezekiel chapter 28, it connects the idea of Eden to a mountain. And so when you're reading Genesis chapter 1, you're really, really reading about a mountain. And so this all tracks back to the idea of a temple on top of a mountain. And so then this kind of ties everything together when it comes to like sacred geography. Anyway, those are my comments.
Yep. Yeah, and going into this, I had another side venture peak of interest would be the I guess looking at the altar and then knowing that the mountain also being symbolic of an altar as well, and then it's giving the specs for that. And so this is more just, once again, how does it relate, and seeing if there's a mountain that kind of matches those same dimensions on a much larger basis, like the talking about an altar that's kind of shaped like a mountain, giving you the exact specs of what that mountain is or what that altar is, and then seeing what actually relates to that in those areas.
Yeah,
Just curious.
I mean, this comes back to the imagery of Sinai, right? When the Most High descended at Sinai, what happened to the mountain? And the mountain smoked. So is this really altar imagery, right? You got the smoke that's emanating from the altar that's going up and so forth like this. And so when an altar is to be made of uncut stones or earth, what imagery could that kind of produce in your head? Well, a mountain, right? Because a mountain is made of uncut stones and it's made of earth. So, there's a very real possibility there that the actual altars themselves may be like a mini mountain, so to speak, that even smokes, just like at Sinai. So again, it goes back to your idea: is the tabernacle stroke temple, is it really built off? When the Most High says according to this pattern, what pattern is he actually saying? Does he mean something up above, or does he actually mean the mountain itself? And so there's lots of questions there that you could ask.
I like just the weird stuff where it's like it literally has nothing to do with theology, just the correlation of like if Sinai actually, the altar is just a miniature Sinai, would be just a cool fact. But yeah, not really anything else. Okay. Any other questions, comments? If you want to insult anyone, and I'm going to go to Matthew while that's happening. Okay, this is the Salt and Light, and I'll just read through both of these. Salt and Light, and also Christ came to fulfill the law. Did you have a different one that you wanted to use for this, or is the Matthew portion fine, Naz?
Matthew's that portion is fine because I'm biased, because I've got my notes ready for that.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if you wanted to pull from another part in the New Testament. Okay, Salt and Light. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but put it on a stand and give it light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of these least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, so in Revelation 21:10, John is taken to a high mountain, right? So when Revelation talks about high mountain, now you should be thinking, okay, high mountain, temple, where he is shown New Jerusalem, where the nations will walk in its light. So New Jerusalem is going to be on a high mountain. This is also an allusion to the hope that we see in Isaiah chapter 60, verse 1 and 2. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of your Tetzaveh has risen on you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the peoples. But your Tetzaveh shall rise on you, and his glory shall be seen on you. And nations shall walk to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawning. So this imagery seems to be behind the imagery of light of the world in Matthew 5. Just as Jerusalem shall be a light to the nation, so also the disciples were to be a light to the world. Even the imagery of the lamp or a lamp is employed when Jerusalem is spoken of in Isaiah. So this is Isaiah 62, verse 1. For Zion's sake, I will not be silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I will not rest, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness and her salvation as a burning lamp. So you got mountain imagery, you got lamp imagery, and you got this kind of light imagery. As we've seen in Revelation and Isaiah, Jerusalem would be exalted on a high mountain, and Matthew 5 similarly has mountain imagery, verse 14. Light, mounting, and lamp imagery hint at the hope of a glorified Jerusalem, and the time when the nations will be walking according to its light. The New Jerusalem is associated with Eden imagery. In Revelation 22:2, the imagery of the tree of life is employed. This is responding to expectations in the prophets that Jerusalem will become the new Eden, Isaiah 51:3, Ezekiel 36:35. Also in Ezekiel, Eden is associated with being a mountain, Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 13 and 14. And so Eden, mountain, and Jerusalem imagery are entwined together and used in Revelation 21:22. The people in Ezekiel chapter 36, 37 are called a flock of men. And the Hebrew word for men is Adam there in that verse for that word. And so the placing of the people, i.e. Ezekiel 36:24, or his new Adam, mimics the flow of Adam being created outside of the garden and then being placed into the garden. Similarly, when the New Jerusalem descends, it mimics the planting of the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2. The people have the divine name on their foreheads, and this has priestly associations as the high priest bears the divine name on his forehead, as we've seen in Exodus chapter 28. Which brings us back to the idea of the high priest and Adam being connected together. The high priest enters into the Edenic, like new temple creation, and fulfills what Adam did not. Likewise, in Revelation, the people fulfilling the role of the high priest and Adam enter into the new Eden, like Jerusalem, and bear the divine name on their foreheads, thus linking Adam, Eden, temple, high priest, and creation together. So really, it all ties together in Revelation 21:22. It draws together all of these different themes: high mountain, Eden imagery, New Jerusalem, the imagery of the high priesthood having the name on the forehead. So you see that in Revelation chapter 22. So it's really all combining all of these together, placing the new Adam into the new Eden, and then finally fulfilling the purpose that the Most High had in the beginning and the intention that the Most High had in the beginning, because the end is declared from the beginning. And so Revelation 22 and Genesis chapter 1, if you read them together and really think about them, you'll see the associations that are together. And that kind of ends the half Torah for me.
All right.
And the Brit section.
Yeah.
And the Torah section.
So all of it's done. Yeah, I think the you are the salt of the earth, and then also, I guess, just looking at all the different references of salt throughout the Old Testament and how the prophets also use the terms of salt, is interesting. And yeah, I might look more into that, just because it's there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. Salt
is used in a very, sometimes a good context, sometimes bad context. Like for instance, in Genesis, salt is connected to the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the wife of Lot changes into a pillar of salt. Why a pillar of salt? Well, it's the idea of barrenness, I would say, because when you get to the Torah in Deuteronomy, when the curses are spoken of, it specifically links salt to Sodom and Gomorrah in the curses. And so I think that's kind of a hint towards the barrenness of Sodom and Gomorrah. And so you got salt being used in bad context, because salt can also be used to salt your enemy's territory to make it infertile. And you can see that happen in the Tanakh as well. But also, it's also used in a good sense. It's used as a covenant of salt. It's used in the context of sacrifices and so forth like that. So it depends. It depends on the context of, what you're going to do with it.
They say that we're the salt of the earth. It can, in context, that could be you're making the earth completely infertile, or it could be that much like the you're bringing like the flavor to the earth as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe it's two sides of one coin, right? When we do what we do because of what the gospel says, we make the plans of the enemy infertile, right? We become the salt. Mm-hmm. Simultaneously, when we do what we do, it's also like an offering before the Most High, and it's savory before the Most High. So I don't know, maybe it's like two sides of one coin.
Yeah. Oh man. And then I'm sure that we'll go into the comments. This is gonna be a multi-hour conversation talking about fulfillment of the law versus abolishment of the law. But overall, does anyone have any like closing comments, questions, anything that they want to go into? This would be concluding the portion for this week. But we'll also take this into the Parsha Talk channel. So if anyone has any questions throughout this entire week, study everything, make comments, take notes, put them in chat, and we'll just be talking about this all week until the next portion. But any other questions, comments, insults, concerns, feel free to ask.